All right. My name is James Davenport, and I am somewhat of a brand new Libertarian, I guess you could say. I'm kind of excited about being here because this convention and leading this panel kind of solidifies or completes my metamorphosis from one perspective to the Libertarian perspective, and that has been something that's been going on for about a decade now. I'm certainly not new to Libertarian ideas or principles, but the more I looked around and the more I observed, the more I came to the recognition that if we want a society that is one where human rights are recognized, where people are free to determine their own fates, that libertarianism was the principles by which that would be best achieved. I am a colleague of Craig's at Rose State College. I teach political science there. Please don't throw any stones or anything. There are a few of us libertarian types in that discipline, although we could use a few more. And I'm going to introduce our panelists. Each of them are going to have between 5 and 10 minutes to kind of give their take on what libertarian is, what it means. I think we can all recognize, even from some of the earlier discussions today, that there is diversity of opinions about different things within our own circles, which is good. And it's beneficial to us to have these exchanges of ideas. So we're going to hear from each of them, as I mentioned, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you guys as well. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So first I'm going to introduce Craig Dawkins. Craig is a professor of economics and finance at Rose State College. He's the vice president of the Drug Policy Reform Network of Oklahoma and a founder and organizer of Liberty on Tap, OKC. DAX EWBANK is a Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate in 2014. He was also a gubernatorial candidate. He's an enterprise solutions architect for a major healthcare company here in Oklahoma, and he is a well-known liberty activist. We have our newly elected state chair, Tina Kelly, who is also a board member of the Drug Policy Reform Network of Oklahoma, and again, a well-known liberty activist. Mr. Steve Long, the current chair of the Oklahoma Libertarian Party, who's also a candidate for House District 81. He's a freelance writer and editor of the Liberty Unfiltered blog. Finally, Mr. Robert Murphy. He is a Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate. He's the former Oklahoma Libertarian Party chair, national committee member, and a platform committee member, and as we have heard earlier, a long-standing member of the Libertarian Party here in Oklahoma and recognized nationally as well for his work in that. So without any further ado, I think we'll just start here with Steve and move down the row that way. And like I said, take 5 to 10 minutes. I don't think anybody's going to kick you off the platform if you take a little bit longer or shorter, as the case may be. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Steve Long. I don't think libertarianism is like liberty itself is very hard to explain, so I'm not going to take too much time. In its essence, I believe that the primary principle of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, and simply put, that's just, don't hurt people, don't break or steal their stuff, and don't force them to do what they don't want to do. So liberty is a very simple concept. I think the debate or divisiveness within the Libertarian Party comes into play when you can't agree on what aggression is. So that's where I think that's where the debate, most of the debate within the Libertarian Party is on issues such as our taxes aggression, is government itself aggression, and I think that's a conversation that is important and that we should have. But other than that, I mean, that really wraps up libertarianism to me.
So when I think about this whole discussion today, what I think about is how do we operationalize the market of voters to agree with us, where our voters as a market are confronted in a paradigm that is a winner-take-all system. that discourages people from casting votes towards what they believe, towards casting votes for the lesser of two evils, as has been previously discussed. The challenge for libertarians has been how to get the market. We value markets as libertarians. In fact, we go around saying markets can handle things. Well, in a very real sense, voters are markets. And our electoral success has frankly been very limited. Now, I'm going to blame the system because, as we know, we have a crony, fixed, rigged system in favor of the two major parties, two private organizations, as people have started to realize as they've started to nominate their presidential candidates, that have control. They've seized control of our government, and not once are they listed in our Constitution. So the challenge for libertarians is how do we operationalize our values in such a way that we can get people to break free, steer clear of the current paradigm that they're confronting, and feel like that they can vote with us. So one of the problems that I see for libertarians is that because people don't know what liberty is, literally, they ask you as a libertarian, or they ask me, well, what do libertarians think? Or what do they believe? Well, I've always said that's an unfair question, because you don't ask a Republican, what do all Republicans believe? What do all Democrats believe? They believe different things. They have different beliefs within the party. And I think once you decide not to form your own party and be a party of one, you have to start making some compromises in order to get people to join your party. The question is, what's too far a compromise? I think one of the problems we have as a party is that people fear that we want to take the paradigm or the needle from where it is now and peg it all the way to the other side. We understand that we can't get to liberty in one fell swoop. It would be great, it would be fast, but I think that scares a lot of people because of the implications of that. I think also that people don't have a grasp, quite honestly, of some of the ideals of liberty that have come before us. And the question is, how many of those do we want to leave behind? How many do we want to embrace? For example, when Friedrich Hayek says that he believes that there should be a basic income. Well, in today's culture of libertarians, that would be heresy, because he's advocating a system that would give people a basic level of existence from the state. So the question is, how can we better express our values as libertarians in the current paradigm to win the market to vote in favor of what we would like to do? When we think about some of our ideals and we think about how, for example, I have believed, and I think most everyone probably in here believes, that we own our own bodies. If we want to sniff potash, no law should be written that would prevent us from doing so. And yet we live in a state where we throw people in cages because they want to smoke cannabis. And so because of that, we become known as the party that just wants to get high. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Maybe that makes us more likable. But I think that in dealing with the market of voters, we have to bridge where we are today. And I have always felt like that it was more important for us electorally to win on issues where, frankly, we are winning. Same-sex marriage, marriage equality. We are winning that argument. That battle is over. We're starting to see cannabis move in our direction. Colorado kicked that, and now we're going to see that expand. The immigration question is very much alive and a vigorous debate today. We just had a conversation, some discussion about religious freedom for everyone, including atheists, Muslims, pasta party or pastarians or whatever they call pastafarians, that's what they are. Although a court just declared that a non-religion. So I think that this discussion today, I very much think that this should be an operationalizing what we believe and how do we get the market of voters to come our way with confidence that we're the best choice and that they should vote for us because, frankly, most people are libertarian to some degree. I am a consequentialist. I would say I'm a proud consequentialist, although someone told me today I'm not as consequentialist. I'm more principled than I think I am. But that's really, I'll stop there.
I think better on my feet. When I first started out in this game, nobody knew what a libertarian was. They thought we were libertines. They thought we were in partners with Lyndon LaRouche, and we got all kinds of negative feedback. Now, after 40 years, I'm proud. I think this is one of the largest libertarian gatherings in the state that I have ever seen. And I thank you all for taking time out of your day to come here. Anyway, there is several points to be made. One is the idea of gradualism. Many people are in a hurry to do things, they get impatient. And many people call, on the other hand, many people say, well, we can't do that, we can't allow this kind of marriage, or we can't support this, we'll turn too many people off. I remember talking to Justin Raimondo, who was a gay man. He was part of the Libertarian Radical Caucus at the 1979 convention. Spoke to him and I said, in Oklahoma, you know, if we talk about gay rights, we're going to get shut down. He said, oh, sure. Then I'll really work to defend your rights next time things come around. Taught me a lesson that if you're aiming for votes, and we are a political party, our goal is to get people elected, to change the laws, to try and dismantle the harmful parts of the state. And that is our focus. You can be a communist, you can be an atheist, you can be any kind of ideology you want. But if you take the libertarian stand, you cannot use the law to promote your ideological things. The best argument about gradualism that I've ever heard, some libertarian or maybe somebody else did it, but it's the idea of a button. If I had a button here on this desk and I could get rid of all the bad laws, have only good laws, and have as free a society as we could possibly do, I'd push the button. But there is no magic in the world. We're dealing with human beings. Everyone wants to have their own vision. Even within the party itself, everyone has priorities. Everyone has some kind of vision in their head of how to change the world. And everybody outside the party has their own visions about how to control the world. When it comes down to practical politics, you have to know, libertarians have to answer all kinds of questions. You've got to make yourself an expert in the Alaska Antiquities Act, in the Louisiana alligator protection thing. I mean, you'll get all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. Back in the old days, David Nolan, the founder of the party, came up with what he called was the 3 C's. No confiscation, no conscription, no counterfeiting. Now, back in 1987, I was the chair of the Oklahoma Party, and it was a presidential nomination year. The LP used to have their nominating conventions in the odd year before the election year. At the state party convention, Ron Paul came to see us, and Russell Means came to speak. They were vying for the presidential nomination in 1987. Ron Paul had a gathering of his newsletter subscribers in a separate little room before he spoke to the convention. And I looked in there and there were about a dozen people. Most of them had camouflage on somewhere, whether it was their hat, their trousers, combat boots, a lot of real rednecks. One of them, when Ron Paul got the nomination, he put a big sign on his truck, but he gave me a book, Our Nordic Heritage. And this bothered me about Ron Paul. You know, how did he attract a bunch of white supremacist militia types. And so I was discontent with having him as our nominee. I got a hold of Frank Zappa. I spent 4 hours in Frank Zappa's living room trying to talk him into running for president. He was kind enough to, he said, you know, I talked to him, I got a hold of his agent, he talked to some friends. They said, the Libertarian Party has some good ideas. So he called me back, said, I'll pay half your airfare if you come and see me. I went through the 3 C's, ignorant as I was at the time. I talked him into the idea that we can find better ways to provide the means to finance the institutions of enforcing the law. Libertarians don't want no laws. At least I don't. You may find libertarians who think we can get along without any laws, but a state with no law and no way to enforce law, no objective public way like a court system, will descend into things like Somalia, and you'll have vendetta and warlords and things like that. But anyway, I always focus on the law. So I convinced him that we could find better ways to finance these institutions. As I convinced him on the 2nd C that we didn't need the draft, that after Pearl Harbor, 3 million men signed up for the Army in the first 3 days. That the American people, if there is what is considered a just war, they will always defend the country. But when it came to counterfeiting, he just could not grasp, as most people cannot grasp, the idea that fiat money, the Federal Reserve printing money, is actually a form of counterfeiting. And he said, sorry, I'm out of here, and I was disappointed. And I could hear, as I drove away, I could hear Maynard Keynes buzzing in my left ear saying, you made a mistake. Generally, when you run a campaign, you have to talk about 3 general ideas: economic policy, social policy, and foreign policy. These are all questions that you're going to have to become familiar with a good answer. Sometimes you need a long answer, but usually you need 1 minute, 2 minutes, even 30 seconds. Have yourself some kind of response. On economic policy, we got to get rid of the Federal Reserve. We're corrupting our money. The Wall Street banks are running things contrary to law. On social policy, everyone should be able to live their lives as they choose, as long as they don't interfere with other people's right to live theirs as they choose. Foreign policy, I agree. I was in the Marine Corps long, long ago, ancient history. They have a hero called Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler. Many of you, I see some of you nodding. You can look on the web for a little booklet, a little speech he gave called War is a Racket. He describes in his 30 years in the Marine Corps how he ran the elections in Haiti for the United Fruit Company. He reinstated different governments in Guatemala, in Ecuador, in Panama, all for the benefit of foreign corporations. Most of our wars that we have been involved in, probably 90%, have started and have been maintained in order to protect corporate assets overseas. We are essentially a mercantile nation. Most of the world is a mercantile nation. We are more so right now because we have the funds, so far, we have the funds or the ability to borrow in order to finance these excursions. The war in Syria is because somebody wants to build a pipeline from Qatar to the Mediterranean. They have to go over parts of Syria. Assad being friends of the Russians don't want competition. This is just like the mafia. You may remember a scene in The Godfather. Most people have seen the movie The Godfather, but there was a godfather, a mafia chieftain. His consigliere, his lawyer, is talking to him. The godfather has refused to participate in the heroin trade. And the consigliere says, please, consider this. There's a lot of money to be made from that white powder. If we don't do it, our enemies will do it. They'll make enough money, and they'll come after us. In many ways, the idea of all these foreign nations competing with each other is very similar to the mafia. Anyway, I think I've worn out my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
I'm going to stand up as well. It came to my attention last night, husband should never point out the age of his wife, but that maybe the idea of out of the coffee shop is lost on some of the generation that came before me, who may not have grown up like I did. I grew up, I was the daughter of a farmer, and every morning all the farmers met at the coffee shop and discussed all the news and the gossip and the important things that were going on for the day. And I kept that sort of my whole life. When my family gets together, every morning we get up, and we have coffee, and we talk about important issues and philosophy and books and things like that. And when I was in college and discovered libertarianism, that just, I just continued that, coffee shops, the pubs, everywhere that you can go and talk about ideals. And so when we started, now that we're on the ballot, and we have real candidates, and people are wanting to know what we're actually going to do, the idea occurred to me that is our challenge, that we need to take these ideals that we've all sat and talked about and hashed out and thought about. We need to take that out into today's world. So out of the coffee shop is that's sort of the idea behind that little phrase. I do think that is our main challenge in talking to people who haven't spent their leisure hours talking politics. Not a lot of people think that's as much fun as we do. So they haven't done it. So some of these things we take for granted. We throw away or throw out concepts like the non-aggression principle and the idea of owning your own body and property rights and all that kind of stuff. Like people just are right there with us in what we're talking about. And the fact is most people are not. And so that is our challenge, that we actually have this philosophy and this principle that's so important to us that we're just like, we got to get this stuff figured out, because this is, it's not just politics, this is the way life should be led. This is the way free people should be interacting with each other. And so we've got all these ideals, but then we've got to move them out and sell them to other people and interact in, for a while I caught myself saying the real world. And I was like, it's not the real world. It's not this is a fake world and this is a real world. This is today's world, and this is what we want tomorrow's world to look like. So we have a way that we're going. We have a direction that we're going, and we actually have those principles. And it's really ironic that they're almost used against us. The other parties aren't sitting in coffee shops talking about their principles and trying to nail down what this perfect tomorrow world is going to look like. They're in coffee shops talking about how can we take the power that the state has and use it to our benefit or to our friends' benefit. That's what they're talking about. They're deciding what they believe day by day, depending on how they can garner power. And they may sell it another way, but in reality, that's what they do. Well, that's not what we do. And so I don't know why that scares people, but it seems to. And a lot of it is because people who don't understand will go to these coffee shop ideals and they'll take the most extreme possible position, and then they'll try to throw that out in today's world and say, well, they just want to do this. We just want to shut down public schools and privatize everything. It's like, well, we kind of probably want to move that direction, but that's not really what we expect to happen. So when we send these candidates off, and we want to kind of tell them what do we really expect from them. Well, most of these coffee shop ideals don't come up for votes very often. They're fun to talk about, and we can talk about them. It's fun to talk about who's going to build the roads, but none of our candidates are going to, be up in voting on who's going to be building the roads. They're going to be voting on the other. I don't know if anybody knows the exact number of legislation that was introduced in the last session, but it was in the thousands. There are literally thousands of votes that can be decided on or can be affected by a person who knows what they want tomorrow to look like, who can vote for solutions that involve less government, less control, more freedom. And I think if we can move the conversation. You know, I don't want to say that we don't need to talk about principles, because we do. We need to be educating on what we want the world to look like. But we need to not let that be used to scare people and dismiss us. Because there are votes, thousands of votes. I mean, there's literally, you know, I mean, those bills, you can't even get them all read. I mean, it's crazy the amount of voting, just incrementally they're taking freedoms, and if we can get up there and incrementally start fighting to get them back, you know, that's what we can do. And I think that, like I said, that's our challenge, and that's also what's exciting about what's happening, because I think government is failing tremendously in so many areas that, like for instance education, that people are willing to look at different options. It's like what's going on now isn't working, it hasn't worked, it's failing spectacularly, and so they're willing to look and say, well, I don't know, what else is possible, what else can we do? And that is what I hope our candidates will step up and start addressing issues like that.
You've heard a lot from me already, but I'm glad to talk some more. I have a phrase that I like to use. It's liberty is the intersection of our common humanity. And it is the, you know, we're all human. And there are some objective things that we have in common. And it's those things that should really be the premise of law, and that should be the premise of any government that we establish. It's establishing justice in those things. I believe in objective morality. I believe that it is objectively discernible what is right and what is wrong. Especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships and interpersonal interaction. It may not be objectively determinable whether being gay is right or wrong, because that's a personal decision. It doesn't affect another person. But it's objectively discernible that it's wrong for me to hit another person or steal their stuff or to break a promise with them. And this is simple. The problem is that it's a very, 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 very small set of, a very small paradigm, a very small context of really what the government should be in charge of. And when you take something, an idea that's so small and so simple, and try to argue that as your premise for, in the context of government as we know it today, it seems ridiculous to most people. They're like, so the questions come up, what are you going to do about the roads? What are you going to do about the schools? What are you going to do about the military? What are you going to do? And then we're left to answer those questions. But as a libertarian and as an idealist, and I'm a proud idealist, by the way, idealism has become kind of a pejorative in a lot of our political conversation today. And that's troubling to me, because the whole point of these institutions and of these things we gather together is idealism, is are we striving for something better? And that's what an ideal is. It's something that you set out in front of you, and then you work towards it, and you try to chip away at everything that is in between you and the ideal. And so we try to get closer and closer and closer each and every day to that ideal. So when I say I'm an anarchist, and people, oh, you know, well, it's an ideal. I don't want to be ruled over by another person, nor do I want to rule over other people. And so what can I do today to get closer to that reality? What can I do today to help somebody else understand that reality? Well, I'm doing it right now. Here I am, talking to a group of people in a germane context. You're all looking at me. You're all hearing the words coming out of my mouth. And maybe somebody will watch it on the internet. Maybe somebody will take this idea and go share it with one of their friends or family members when they get home. And by doing so, we're getting closer to that ideal. And so to me, being a libertarian isn't necessarily about winning elections, because I don't think that there is any power really in winning the election. I think the power is in getting the idea inside the mind of the people. We are built a certain way, or we evolved a certain way, however you choose to believe it, but we are rational animals. Our minds are rational machines. And once a truth comes into our mind, it's very reluctant to let go of it. And when cognitive dissonance comes into our mind will not stop until it resolves it. And so when we do go out and we share bold and sometimes controversial issues, especially in a political paradigm, so it creates that cognitive dissonance in the minds of our friends and neighbors. I call that, and many of you have heard me give this talk before, but I call them mental firewalls. All of us have been raised a certain way, and we've been raised under a certain paradigm, a certain context of what words mean and what ideas mean. And those have shaped the way we think and the way we act and the way we vote. And it also shapes the kind of authority we submit to. And most of that authority is objectively not valid, illegitimate. But we've been conditioned really not to think about it. So we just go along with it. And so as we present these libertarian ideas, like the idea of the drug war being immoral. Well, I was raised in school that you just say no, and drugs are wrong, and drugs are bad, and drug users are dangerous, and they're a menace to society. And when a cop arrests a drug user, or even if they've never hurt anybody, their drug use alone is victimizing the community somehow, right? I mean, are you guys familiar with these ideas, or was I the only one raised in this way?
Several of us grew up.
Right, so sure. But then when we bring in stories like Jackie Angel, a little baby that can be healed with marijuana from epilepsy, and when we show stories of families torn apart because a mom or a dad was put in prison because of marijuana use that was otherwise not harmful to their family, and we begin to break through those mental firewalls, we begin to create that cognitive dissonance in the minds of people, all that you have to do is sit back and wait. And then the policy will change. And the way that we measure those policy changes is in the results of elections. So we don't, it's almost like we work the system backwards. We don't necessarily try to win elections in order to exert the authority, the illegitimate authority of the state in order to enact libertarian principles. What we do is we run elections so that we can see to what degree our principles are being accepted by our friends and neighbors. It's just a poll. Okay, and over time, I think what we'll see is that poll will begin to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there will be because our ideas are rational, our ideas do make sense, and as people begin to understand them, they will take hold, and we'll begin to see them playing out in public policy and in the institutions that we gather together to create. That's never going to stop. People are always going to gather together and create institutions. What needs to change is the premise by which they operate when they do those things. What is the premise of authority? The non-aggression principle ought to be there somewhere, I think. At least should be a consideration. And then we go from there. So that's and so in the party, and as we build a party, a lot of people are like, well, you know, this is a waste of time. All we're doing is feeding the beast. We're legitimizing the beast. We're by participating in it. But we're really not. Because we're speaking truth into it. We're speaking truth to power. And we're doing so, I mean, we did it today amongst ourselves. We're having legitimate discussions about policy, about ideas, about principles, and about pragmatism too. And we're trying to put that all together to see how can we make that work in a way that's as unoffensive as possible to who we are and who we want to be and to where we want to be in the future. So that's kind of my take on libertarianism. It's kind of where I'd like to see us go. And not that I'd like to see us go, that's where I know we're going. If it's just me doing it all by myself, if I was the only libertarian on earth, I could do this. Because all I have to do is start telling people about it, and it starts growing. I don't know if you've ever seen how a lightning bolt works, but what happens is the charge builds up on the ground until it's strong enough, and at some point, some undetermined point that's hard to calculate, it's strong enough to attract the bolt from the sky. And then you get the lightning bolt. And I believe that the same is true with these ideas that we're spreading, is that as different minds grab a hold of them, and they can't let go of them, and they begin to work that cognitive dissonance out, it creates that charge on the ground. And then at some given point, and nobody will be able to take credit for it, boom, it's going to be public policy. The drug war will be over like that one day. People will understand that the Federal Reserve is counterfeiting money like that one day. It's not that it's not going to be a challenge, it's not that it's going to be easy, but if we will just keep doing what we do, and if we will stick to our principles and not fall into the trap that the other parties have fallen into just unreserved pragmatism and unreserved quest for that, that ring of power, I think that we will eventually see success. Maybe it'll be in 200 years from now. But to me, that's still worth it, and I'd still like to be a part of that change, even if I'm not here to see it. So.
Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions from our audience. So if there's anyone, okay, so I've got one here, and then I'll come to you next.
So this is to Tina, who says we don't have to. Who was talking about not about we're not going to worry about who's going to build the roads, but that's always the first question that people ask is who builds the roads, who fixes the roads,
Who builds them now?
So how would you? So since I get asked it all the time, and no one seems to accept any kind of answer that I have, how would you answer that?
I would have in my back pocket a list of actual votes that are coming up. I don't remember in the last session any vote on who's going to build the roads coming up. That's an interesting conversation, it's an important conversation. There's nothing wrong with having that conversation, but actually what did come up with votes on mandatory vaccinations, budget cuts, all kinds of, the budget stuff is, tons of votes. Let's see what else came up. Real ID.
2275 and DNA.
Yeah, the civil asset forfeiture wasn't heard. There are many other things that are on the plate today that I think should be the front of the discussion. And I would do my best to swing the attention to, like I said, who'll build the roads. I mean, that's kind of, I think it's a diversion. It's a way to dismiss all of these other things. It's like, here's all this massive amounts of things that we can vote on that affect our freedom, but we're going to dismiss you because you don't have an answer for this one thing, or because that's an ideal. Do you know what I'm saying? I think don't let them dismiss you.
I understand completely.
Yeah, don't let them dismiss you because of it.
Could I say just a word? There is a trend in much libertarian literature, not much, but there are certain libertarians who advocate that all roads should be private, and this is a way to solve a lot of problems because as a private road, they could keep people from traveling on them that are criminals or outlaws or things like that. This goes completely against the American, the English, American tradition that there are roads, no matter who supplies them. I don't care if the government supplies the roads, it doesn't bother me. I would prefer that the main highways be somehow, instead of paid for by some other taxes. I think actually gas taxes are a fairly efficient way to pay for highways, but there could be other ways like toll roads. But no one should be allowed to deny access to people from going from place to place, no matter who they are.
I would just add also that we actually have a libertarian. I actually took this vice chair spot of a libertarian who was actually elected to build the roads. So, a county commissioner, your chairman today. And so actually, I think in a conversation with him, he could say, there's ways to build the roads that are better, use of government and use of taxpayers. So it's actually a conversation, but.
As a libertarian, what I would like to add to that is that there's also a libertarian viewpoint within the current paradigm. A lot of our roadways are built as a subsidy to heavy trucking. They pay less tax per gallon of fuel for diesel than unleaded fuel users pay. And so it is in large measure a subsidy to large trucking companies who largely are the ones that damage our roadways. And so as a libertarian, you know, quite honestly, the industries that are doing the most damage to, you drove up here today, right, to our roads, you know, when you pass into Arkansas and Texas generally, and Kansas. And frankly, you know, I would advocate that diesel users should bear more of the load. They're creating more of the damage. They should bear more of the burden. Now, if that means that they leave our industry, they leave our state, and they choose to go to another state, well, that's their choice. But an indirect subsidy is a problem for me.
Well, and also it's always the issues that realistically, and don't throw rocks at me for saying this, anarchist, but realistically, the issues that are always brought up are generally the things that we really don't have a problem with our tax dollars going to in the first place. Right? And so it's like, they say, who will build the roads? Who will take care of the poor people? And I'm like, well, who will bomb the hospitals in Afghanistan? because you can't have one without the other with our system. And so I don't think that we would have the fervor in our hearts to jump up and be activists if all our government did was build roads and take care of poor people, would we? I don't think we'd be here saying, quit stealing from me to do that. Even though we may find it inconvenient or even a burden, or even though we may have problems with how those programs are administered. But what we do have a problem with are all the things that our money is taken for, and it's used literally to kill people directly, and hurt people directly, cage people directly. And so when we say taxation is theft, and we get the road problem thrown at us by a liberal, I love our roads, I love our national parks, I love these. You know, it's like, okay, that's great, but do you love bombing hospitals in Afghanistan? Do you love caging peaceful people for using a plant? Because your tax dollars are paying for that too. And as a libertarian, and as that gradualism that Robert spoke about, why can't we just at least go in and try to get rid of those things? And get the government down to handling those issues that none of us really have a problem with, and all we'd really like to see is for them to be done better. So,
I've got one here, and then I'll get to you.
Let's just continue with that with regard to the blame, okay? And all the way back to Basquiat, he said, you know, basically the socialists will claim that because, you know, we complain about the schools, we don't like education, okay? Or because we don't go into government growing wheat, we don't want people to eat. So it's nothing new. I mean, he goes way back. So the situation I have on that is Robert mentioned the 3 C's earlier that he started with way back. DAX has got 4 M's, okay? And this is an internal thing because, I mean, this is an internal thing that we discuss quite often. At what point do you draw the line within libertarianism to say, no, sir, you're not a libertarian? If you can't go there, you've missed the basic precept, and you don't get to claim the libertarian mantle. In other words, you see this all the time. We're ambivalent. The libertarian platform is on abortion, for example, deliberately so, because intelligent people can have that argument back and forth, and it's a very in-depth and personal thing. But on other issues, freedom, okay, Muslims, Mexicans, marijuana, and marriage, okay, 4 M's. And if you want to go into that, at what point do you say, no, sir, you don't understand the NAP? Okay, because we run into this now, and we run into it. I've been like 5 years now, since the Ron Paul deal. I run into it, as we all know, coming out of the GOP, some of us did, where Liberty folks, okay, could not grasp onto those, but still want to claim the mantle.
I'll tell you, when I ran for governor, if there's anything I regretted was not drawing that line clear enough, because I was running as a Republican,
well, explain the 4 M's first, in case somebody hasn't heard.
The 4 M's are basically the 4 things that separate a Tea Party kind of conservative from a libertarian. And the 4 M's are Mexicans, marriage, marijuana, and Muslims. And if you want the state to prohibit any of these 4 things, then you're probably not a libertarian. And if you look at Republican right-wing campaigns, these are the 4 issues that they primarily run, and they're fear-based issues, knee-jerk issues. This is the core of the Trump campaign, the core of the Cruz campaign, the core of Langford's whole campaign, is based on fear of these 4 issues in some regard. Right?
So you're talking about same-sex marriage, immigration, foreign policy with the Muslims, and then drug policy. Those 4 things. And he just uses, I thought it was great, 4 M's.
And like I said, when I was running as governor, and I was a Republican, so I was going to Tea Party meetings and GOP meetings. And so, you know, I was playing the game a little bit of just not going there sometimes, because I didn't want to get beat up. You know, I was in another town all by myself. But anyway, I wish I wouldn't have done that, to be honest with you. And as a libertarian, I'm free not to do that. And you say, well, you're going to lose votes. Listen, I'm okay with losing votes. What I want to do is present the idea and cause that person to struggle with the idea. Because I know that that is effective. I know that my words, when they come out, if I articulate them well, that it will have an effect on that individual that hears me.
I would just like to say that John brought up something that is important, and that is often libertarians get accused of being against things strictly because they don't want the government to be in charge of it. So if we say we want to improve education and we reject the social approach from the Democrats and Republicans, then they say we're against education, when really we're for competition in education to make it better. I mean, we could flip that around easily and say you're against education because you're more interested in rewarding administrators and the system rather than actually students and educators themselves in the classrooms. This goes along a whole host of things. So anything you can think of, taking care of the poor. We get accused of being, you know, we want to kick them out on the streets to die. That's not at all what libertarians support. We're not trying to inflict the maximum amount of pain. We're about coming up with a different way of meeting that need that is more efficient, less costly, and less rent-seeking. Let's be honest. In 2013, the United States spent $1 trillion when you add federal, state, and local monies towards taking care of the poor. 12% of that amount was in the amount of cash assistance. So 88% of all the financial resources dedicated to take care of the poor were in non-money related assistance. So when you think about the absurdity of that, if the primary problem with the poor is that they don't have money, and 88% of the money we spend is on non-cash assistance, then I think what we're not doing is we're not helping the poor. And we could help the poor for a whole lot less than we currently are spending if we would just change our approach, but that would mean laying off a bunch of bureaucrats and actually just giving people money and letting them do what they need to do.
I've got one here, and then there, and then to you, all right? And then nobody over here wants to ask. Oh, okay. Then we'll go here first. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to be a devil's advocate of sorts and channel my super way out there Bernie Sanders loving in-laws and throw some things that they're going to throw at me. You could call this the logical fallacies can abound in a lot of these things. Black and white issue, a slippery slope, personal incredulity, bandwagon appeal to authority, composition, or division, but the biggest one I think of is a tu quoque. You're answering criticism with criticism. Who's going to build the roads? Well, who's going to bomb? You're tossing a negative out instead of responding to a negative with a positive. It's kind of giving those equal weight, even though both of those cost money, and both of them, unfortunately, are part and parcel with today's political system. How then can we? You're talking about DAX. You're talking about struggling with ideas. I mean, we need to know these ideas, but how can we
drive those ideas home and drive these points home without getting into the fallacies that they are going to hit us with. If they're going to do their homework and they're going to pull whatever statistic or whatever out, which, by the way, Craig, I love your 88%. That was awesome. I'm going to keep that in my pocket. But how do we respond to those sorts of things instead of just on the spot saying a negative for a negative?
With content, basically, right?
I would just answer that as saying that too often people look for perfection as an answer to a problem. They want perfection, and so therefore we let perfection be the enemy of the good. And there's too many times where better solutions are rejected because they aren't perfect in somebody's mind. And so, you know, the question is, if they ask who builds the road, you should ask them, do they like the roads that they're driving on today?
One thing, there's what I consider to be an excellent resource for libertarian answers. The Advocates for Self-Government. You can Google it. Mary Ruward and Sharon Presley and the founder of it, who died, have been working for 35 years developing little seminars, answers to libertarian things. Also the Reason Foundation has a lot of information on that. Local governments, local problems, libertarian solutions. Was written in the 80s. I used it when I ran for mayor of Tulsa, but some of them are outdated. The Reason Foundation often goes for things like privatizing fire departments and things like that. I think, who cares who runs the fire department? As long as they put out fires, as long as there's some public commission to see they don't waste money or things like that. But always, you have to remember...
I have a good idea on that.
You have to remember that when you're speaking to any group of people, rather than compromise yourself, remember that you're speaking to the larger audience. I remember a couple of years ago I was in Shawnee. One of the first questions that came up was abortion. I presented the answer that abortion should be completely up to the woman. It's her body. A fetus is her property, just like her liver and her heart and her lungs and her kidneys. And she can do anything she wants as long as it's within her body and she is nurturing it. She has complete control over what happens to that. There were frowns and shaking of the heads. This is an audience in Shawnee, Oklahoma, maybe 100 people. And most people just rejected that idea completely. But afterward, 4 people came up to me and said, you know, I never thought of it that way. And so you have to remember that when you get a question, and especially an antagonistic question, there are ways using the answers in those sources to formulate the answer in such a way, like if the question seems conservative, out-conservative the person. If the answer seems liberal, out-liberal them. And there are ways to do that.
I would add, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think part of the problem comes from libertarians aren't wanting to come up with solutions. We're wanting government to get out of the way so people can come up with their own solutions.
That's a solution in itself.
But it always sounds negative. It's like, well, all you want to do is tear this down and negative, negative, negative. What's your solution? Well, you know, it's almost fair, really, because that's kind of what we want to do. We do want to get the government out of the way so that people can come up with solutions. I don't think that we claim to have the answer to things or the way to make things perfect. We just have faith that if government will get out of the way and people were allowed to interact with each other freely, that better things will happen. And so I do think that there are ways to couch some of that so that it doesn't sound negative. But I think every vote that comes up at the Capitol, you're either going to move toward more government or less government. And from a libertarian's point of view, you're going to move from not trying to offer a solution, but try to get government out of the way as much as possible. So it can come off as negative. Yeah, I think you just gotta have to say it in a way that we are not for more government solutions. We're not gonna propose them. I don't, for the most part, I just don't think, you know, I just don't think that's the business that we want to be in.
More governing ourselves
Yeah.
than...
Yeah. But there are always ways in every issue, see, I almost said real life. Today's world, ways to vote for things. Like you can get government out of the business of public schools in increments. You don't shut down public schools. You know, and by the way, I think that's another one of those moral high grounds that people own just by owning the word. They own the term public education. None of us are against an educated public.
Yeah.
And yet, everything that we say sounds negative because they're up on this hill saying, we're for public education. Everything we things like, well, we're against that. Well, we're not. You know, it's just the way that you couch things. But I think it's our whole philosophy is why it can come off as negative. Because we just want to take down things.
I've got here, and then here, and I've got 2 in the queue over here, right? And then you got one, right?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I'm going to go back to this who built the roads thing, because that's actually my job right now. And well, the first thing I'd like to do as a Libertarian Republican is repeat something that a hero of mine said, that government is not the solution, it's the problem. One of the things that I've noticed in helping us to build roads is that government is so inefficient in what it does today in the state of Oklahoma in building roads. We waste about an order of magnitude at the county level. The funds are wasted on an order of magnitude. What I mean by that, if it costs the county $200,000 to pave a mile of road, if you get the state involved in it with federal matching funds, it will cost $2 million to pave that road. That's just the way it is. That's because they're so inefficient with the way they bill out money. They control the contracts. There's a state agency that we have to deal with that maintains a list of all the physical engineers or professional engineers that are allowed to work on roads. So you have to pick somebody off of that list. So it's the cronyism that's built into it. So when someone asks who will build the roads, my answer is we will build the roads, but we want to do it more efficiently and with less government involvement. Not that government can't build roads, but that's why we talk about limited government, right? The reason that governments are so bad, so inefficient at what they do today is because they're not run as a business. And you hear people say, well, you can't run a government as a business. Well, there are some things you can't do. But the things that you can do is fire people that are inefficient. In a business, when I run my business, and the businesses that I came from, if you didn't produce, you didn't stay, right? How many of y'all get to go to work every day and just lounge around and drink coffee? You probably won't make a lot of money doing that, right? The other thing is the budget side of it. The budgetary issues that we have with government organizations, it's amazing to me. If you don't manage your budget well in business, you go out of business, right? If you don't manage your budget well in government, you get promoted. And so I would say that is what I, as a Libertarian Republican, would answer that with. Who is going to build the roads? We will still build the roads, but we will do it in a more efficient manner as we work through these issues and get more liberty-minded people in positions that can affect those changes.
Right.
That's all my answer.
Yes, sir.
Oh, 2 things real fast. Can I connect kind of what he said and what he was talking about with your ideas of sometimes there's not really a solution at the moment? Well, I've been on this big kick about explaining to people the issues with the drone warfare. And I got a lot of flack for when Tulsa, and I posted on the internet page a picture of a child victim of drone strikes. And a lot of people got mad. You can't just post a picture of a dead baby and not give me a solution. I said, you know, well, this is the effect. He is one of pretty much all the candidates that want to continue doing this. And after they stopped, you know, with the ad hominem attacks and actually started talking to me, you know, we had some decent conversation, but part of what he just said, the government is not the solution, it's the problem. And when you talk about people finding solutions, the first step in finding a solution is to assess the problem. Everybody knows that. You can't do math if you don't know what numbers you're adding. That's really the problem. So, I mean, that's just...
The problem is there's no economic incentive for government to provide a solution. In fact, there is incentive for government to exacerbate the problem.
We were
And
just talking about how.
all political capital is wound up in the problem existing. Okay? And so this is a problem that libertarians actually have in running elections, is that when we actually propose solutions that would actually solve problems, it is a threat to a large portion of the voting public. Okay, because we're talking, and a threat even if at the end of the day it wouldn't actually harm them. So like the public school teachers don't want to vote for libertarians because they think that they're going to be out of a job. Or the police officers don't want to vote libertarian because they think they're going to be out of a job. And so you have these sacred institutions that are always underfunded, always mismanaged. The highway department doesn't want to vote libertarian. Why? Because they'll be out of a job. And so, so providing solutions. See, in the political world, political capital is based on those problems existing, and that's why the abortion debate is never seriously debated. There is never serious discussion about how do we reconcile and create good policy that not only protects the life of an unborn child as we see it, but also protects the liberties of the woman. We don't. Instead, we dichotomize the issue, and we capitalize on the political capital that comes from that issue. And we do the same thing with education, we do the same thing with roads, we do the same thing with every problem that we have. And basically, it's just the reality that we're in. And I think that the only solution is to make people personally and morally accountable for the decisions that they're making. And when they understand that the things that they are advocating are immoral, I mean, then our job is basically done. It's on them now whether they choose to continue to act immorally or to choose to change their ways.
I hadn't really thought about how I never thought about it in this context, what a positive thing that being negative as a libertarian is before. But sometimes just showing up to vote, not on maybe how to fix this problem, but how to keep this one from happening. Vote no on this issue. And sometimes the best way to do that is to make whoever's voting on it or whoever's proposing it understand that all our rights are all tied together. We kind of have this thing about those people. Nobody votes for tyrannical government for themselves, but yet we'll demand it to control those people, whoever those people happen to be. And it's so short-sighted, because the minute we build this structure of tyranny, it's enacted on all of us. So there's moral grounds for some of the things that we want to do, but we can push that on selfish grounds to people who don't understand as well. I'll just give you an example. Everybody's familiar with John Bennett and his anti-Muslim stuff. Well, last year he's wanting to press this bill. I don't know if you know what fusion centers are as well. The fusion centers are where all these government agencies take all the information about you and put it in one place. And there's supposedly only a certain amount of people who have access to that. Well, John Bennett wanted to pass this law, or introduce this law, that says that basically everybody in the Capitol, your sheriff and your mayor, I mean, it was just this far-reaching invasion of privacy, would have access to that information. Well, he, single-mindedly, tunnel vision, is thinking that he's afraid of Muslim terrorists coming and taking over our state, right? So he's thinking this. So he's wanting to build this tyranny to control those people, in his mind, that need to be controlled. Well, I simply, in about 10 minutes in a phone call with him, said, well, when you build this, and you give away all this privacy stuff, what about the next person that wants to label homeschoolers as a terrorist threat? Then they're going to have access to everybody who's homeschooled information. Well, I know that that's something that John Bennett is a fan of. So there are things that he's a fan of that if you just point out to him, you're trying to control these people, this is going to backfire on all of these issues. He dropped that bill. He didn't really drop it for the moral reasons that I really wanted him to drop it for, but he dropped it nonetheless. And it was that revelation to him that, oh, well, I didn't really realize, I hadn't thought that through yet. So sometimes just being I'm really kind of liking this idea of embracing the negativity. I've always thought about how to combat it before, but I kind of like it.
Assess the problem he thought he was addressing.
yeah, he just never thought it through. He's just single-mindedly on this issue. Well, I think that all these, there's so many laws and stuff out there, and that's what they're doing. Well, let me solve this, not realizing, you know, that you know, all our freedoms are tied together.
All right, we got
They
about
just are.
4 questions in my queue. Did you still have a question at the back there, right? And then I'm going to the gentleman in the cap, and then you there, right? Number 4, all right.
Okay, so everybody knows that our voter turnout last year was terrible in Oklahoma. And basically, I'm a college student, and I know that a lot of the kids my age don't care about politics, are not active at all. And I was wondering if you guys were pushing any incentives or anything like that to try getting young people involved in politics, or at least try to reach out to them at all to get them involved. Because from what I understand in college, we don't trust the government at all. Like we're done with it. Like we're sick of it, and a lot of people don't have any hope anymore.
So why would we want to change that?
But like the Libertarian thing, I'm actually the president of a Libertarian group on campus called Young Americans for Liberty. Awesome. But I was wondering if maybe okay. Now I'm nervous. You guys clap for me. I was wondering if you guys would try to go to colleges to try getting kids involved and to let them know that there is a third option now. There's not just Republican and Democrat. Because whenever we showed up and we're like, hey, we had a registered vote thing, and everyone's like, well, you're a real party now. I had no idea, whatever. And we were registering everyone to vote because we were trying to get everyone to vote. And all we got people to sign was for Libertarian. But we only got 22 people to register to vote. But they all registered as Libertarian. So I was wondering if you guys would try.
Well, the short answer would be yes.
I'm trying to start one of those chapters here.
But any one of us would come.
He's right though. You can't just project that on him. And I'm looking from the outside too as a dude. He has enough burden just doing what he did. You guys, as the leadership that have brought everybody here together, just like Ron Paul brought everybody, or a lot of people here together, have got to come up with social media, internet solutions, campus solutions.
Right.
That these young people, they want it.
Right.
They're ready to sign 22 and 22 on the line.
Right.
But you have to have something.
Sure. I think part of the problem is one of education, and you know, I can't remember, it was Pew. Pew did a study, and they've been tracking who votes. There's only one group, demographic group, of Americans based on age that have increased their voting participation since 1960, and that has been 65 and over. Every other demographic group, when you take the 18 to 24, and you take the 24 to 30-something, and then you take the 30-something to 60, I guess, their rates of voting are going down. So here again, it goes back to the market. Politicians respond to the market. And so you can't really change the world until you vote. And I know that's a simple thing to say, but when you look at who's voting, that is, in fact, anybody that's run for office will tell you, who did they go see? Do they go see the ones who didn't vote last election? No. They go to the election board and they get the list to see who voted, and that's who they go talk to. And so the problem is this has to be viral. The problem is it has to be viral. The people that aren't voting have to figure out that they need to vote. Now, how does that occur? I don't know. But I do think the solution is more on what you're doing than centralizing a top-down approach. I really feel like this is something that needs to break out organically. And people that are younger have they have to get a sense that the reason why the age of, when I grew up, by the way, when I was younger, from 18 on, I drank legally. Why? Because the age was 18. Well, why did that change? Well, young people were very involved during the 60s whenever there was a draft. Why were they involved? Well, they were worried about the wars. Why were they worried about the wars? Well, because they might get drafted.
Are you advocating for the draft?
No, but when they ended the draft, young people, they just disappeared. Why? Well, because their issue was gone. So the one issue that they cared about most, which was being conscripted into fighting wars they didn't want to fight, went away. Therefore, there was kind of this mass reduction in young people that stopped voting. And then all of a sudden, Reagan came to office, the guy that says government is the problem, not the solution, is the guy that imposed a government solution that raised the age of drinking to 21 if you wanted to have federal highway dollars. So I guess what I'm saying is that young people, how do we make young people understand that it's in their self-interest as a entity that wants to have more freedom? How do we get them to see it that way? Because the old folks are voting, and that's where the politicians and who the politicians are listening to.
I think it'll happen when those issues come back around, like the drug war. I think that that's going to just bring massive amounts of young people to take that issue.
Got a question right up here?
So not so much a question, but just several people over there were talking about how to broach topics, deal with trying to spread libertarian ideas, or even just have a conversation. The first thing we all got to remember is we're all really good at taking bait and getting into arguments that are going to make you not look good. You got to realize when you're dealing with somebody like that, write it off. Don't continue that argument, because you don't have to reach everybody. And there's some people who are talking to you with the intent to not get reached. The second thing is, a big part of what I've started doing now is I used to just tackle every single, Facebook post, whatever, and just tell them why it was stupid. Instead, I'm looking for the people who are posting things that are slightly libertarian, but aren't libertarians, and just private messaging them at the platform. Because libertarianism sounds like magic. People do things. Who's going to build the roads? Where's the government? What is this? Is this totally anarchic? Let them read it so it becomes a known situation instead of just this unknown thing that they're too lazy to do a simple Google search for. But a personal message says, I take an interest in you, I read what you posted and I cared about it, and I'm not looking for an argument with your mom and your family members and your best friends. I'm just saying, hey, if you're interested in this. And that has had so much more of a positive effect on people, even people who still think it's the stupidest thing ever. I'm getting a more mature response from them because it's a chance for them. It's not like I'm publicly calling them out to say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot. I'm just saying, hey, that was very intelligent. Take a look at the libertarian platform because you have a lot in common. And so anyway, the other thing is when you're debating with people, make sure they know what a libertarian is. Because if they don't, you're not having a valuable conversation by arguing one single point, like who builds the roads or anything like that. Because, so say you even have the right answer for that. That doesn't mean they're going to become a libertarian. That doesn't mean that answer applies anywhere else. But questions like that are bait. And so the real thing is you need to help people learn how to identify what the actual problems are, not what are the situations where I can trip up the whatever I think the Libertarian Party is. Instead, so if we're talking about who needs to build roads, well, what's the problem with that in the first place? What are some problems with building roads? Enrich the conversation instead of steer it, which I'm very guilty of, and that's why I like this private message approach, because you're not getting hit by 17 people slamming you or supporting you or asking things. And so taking it to a more private level gives you a chance to reach one person.
I think, definitely interacting with people on a personal level is key, because that's the whole mental process I've just described works. But also, let's talk pragmatics as far as a party. With your organization and the different student organizations around the state, Robert and I are running, I think, the only statewide primary this year.
A libertarian will win an election this year.
Yeah, we will. One of us. We can look forward to that, and we can all celebrate. But when I ran as a Republican, one of the easy things about doing that was I could call up any county chair and have a meeting and be able to go to that place and speak to people just like that, anywhere I wanted, because the party infrastructure was set up in such a way that it makes that really easy, and it's very useful to a candidate. We don't have that, and right. And to what Steve Long said earlier about the whole ballot access initiative being a waste of time, and I don't know if waste of time is I
actually use those words.
Right, I think you did, but anyways. Okay, but I'm like thrilled that we got there, but it was, our cycles did have to go to that instead of going to other things. And because of that, we don't have the infrastructure that we would have otherwise had put in place if our cycles would have had been redirected towards putting that infrastructure in place. So now we need to do that. especially if we're going to have a statewide primary that looks legitimate, and it needs to look legitimate. Because if we want to go up against Langford, whichever one of us wins, we want to do so with an air of authority as serious candidates, so that we can either win that election or at the bare minimum push him on the issues that we want to push him on, right? And unless we enter that race with some kind of a legitimacy, it's going to be difficult to do that. So putting those organizations together, talking with Tina, and using the party as an information gathering tool so that we can start building those lists out of who is meeting where. And this is really mundane, boring stuff. This is not the passionate, like, I believe in this kind of stuff. This is lists of people, where they meet and what time and what their phone number is. And it's vitally important for our party to be effective moving forward.
We got, just to let everybody know, we've got enough time to get our remaining 2 questions in, and then we're going to have to cut it off. So I'll go ahead here, and then you, sir, at the back will have our final question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just, a quick comment on voting. Young people have figured out that the system is utterly broken. There's no qualms about who the Democrats and the Republicans are, and that they both serve effectively the same master. So I'm just telling people, hey, go vote, in a rigged system, it's not going to motivate them. They're not, but when you go tell them, hey, join this group of people that are doing direct action, we're doing direct democracy, we're hitting the streets, we're doing these things ourselves. We're not going to rely on representatives to do it for us. We're going to go do it ourselves. And suddenly we have thousands of people that are young registering to vote. And they don't really care to vote on anything else, but if the people put something on the ballot, they will go vote for it. Because they know that's not rigged. They know that's a real thing that the people did. And so I would just encourage everybody to utilize direct democracy. Like ballot access is a form of direct democracy. You got a lot more people interested now because you went through that process, because you got on the ballot. There's people that were out there gathering signatures for the Libertarian ballot access that aren't libertarians, that had nothing to do with libertarianism, but now libertarianism's in their mind. That idea's in there, that concept's in there, and then maybe like 3 months later they'll actually research it or something. So direct democracy, hitting the ground, like this is the era that we live in. The internet era is not an era where we like sit back and watch TV and are passive participants. We have to be active participants, and within the Libertarian Party as well. So like these electoral issues are very important, but we also got to like do the democracy ourselves. Like ignore the representatives, and sometimes even get arrested for it if they want to like throw us in prison, because that's what it's going to end up coming down to. And on another note, like I just want to ask you guys, what do you think the scope? So we've had a lot of discussion about private versus public, and what to prioritize as far as eliminating kind of the oppressive government. So I think another thing that we're kind of missing there is, what is the scope of that? Are we doing that at the state level? Are we doing that at the municipal level? Where are we going to fight the battle? In my opinion, fighting at the state level is very difficult. Fighting at the federal level, even more so. The federal level's gone. I don't think we'll ever successfully liberate the federal system. But like, we may liberate Oklahoma, and in Tulsa or some of these municipalities, we've got a pretty good shot. We can change the culture. I mean, look how fast marijuana prohibition has ended. The culture shifted, and overnight it feels like prohibition's ending across the United States. And it wasn't a matter of years, it wasn't a matter of decades. Even in Oklahoma in 2016, we can legalize medical marijuana. And people a few years ago were telling me that's not going to happen for decades. So, my question is, where's the scope of the Libertarian Party going to focus? Are we going to focus on the state level? Or are we going to try to be in the neighborhoods? Like, be in the streets? Like, be where people are already organizing and try to, reach people that way?
I don't know if I can answer the entire question, but let's go back to the first thing you said. The last convention, I wasn't even part of the party. It seems like years ago, but I came to the convention, but I didn't even pay my delegate fee because I wasn't sure. So we jumped into it, and then there's been like this 2 years of whirlwind. And through all this time, everybody is always asking, well, how do we get more people in the party? How do we grow the party? How do we grow the party? Well, I never had an answer for that, because in my mind it was like, we'll get them into the party to do what? And I didn't think, if we don't answer to do what, then, you know, setting up meetings where people don't know what, you know, that, you know, people don't have time to do that. So I think there's been this evolution of to do what has kind of sort of come around. And I think right now there's a big vision of what we want to do. And so I think these meetings, even though, you know, somebody just asked me, where's the next meeting? And I have to say, you know, right now, even at this convention, I don't know. But I hope in a month from now, I can list off 10 places. I think it's going to happen that fast, because we've answered the question, to do what? And a lot of the to do what right this second has to do around with elections and things, but that's a temporary thing. We may or may not keep ballot access. The to do what has to start embracing the relevancy that our ideas can have.
Well, and look at what we've done as a party. The direct action is what's grown the party. Okay, we participated in Muslim Day at the Capitol 2 years, and it was a great response, and it was a thing to do. And people showed up, and we're excited about it, and we're activists. We had the WTF Day a couple years ago.
Where's the freedom, not what you're thinking?
Is that what it's? I thought
Actually, it was
But you know, those kind of direct action things where we go out either to a protest or to something, they have been the most, the best things to get people interested and to meet people and to grow the party.
420 rally.
Yeah.
We've got one last question.
I was going to just make one comment about that. I think specifically your question is really to a specific person. What are, you know, because not everybody can have time to, I'm actually do things at all levels. I spent the last 6 months, as any public union member will tell you, fighting a municipal campaign, and you know, they've got a whole Facebook page in my honor at this point, which is awesome.
Where has that gotten you, Craig?
It's gotten me in great places, I guess. Yeah. So I think that ultimately, you make a good point. The municipal elections, quite frankly, are a great place to be involved, because it's the easiest to win, because really the only people that participate are those that are either are connected to or are family members of members of the public unions who tend to control these municipal elections. Your city elections are probably some of the most important things that you can do, because it's the closest to you, and yet it's one of the things that fewest people actually do. So, I mean, the campaign that we ensued, we had 45% votes against the unions. We lost, but that's 45%. We only need to make some gains. But the fact that we were in opposition makes you respectable, and it makes your positions worthwhile. Even if they disagree, they can't just dismiss you, because 45% is still 45%. So I think it's I think you have to fight the battles everywhere, wherever you can, anywhere all the time. But I think you raise a good point, because I think municipal elections are a particular opportunity. If you can activate people on a local level, you can win.
One more thing, James. I was also going to say, just from my point of view, and I guess I'm the chair, so so from my vision, I think you're right. I think the federal government, other than fighting this horrible war around the world, I mean, I'm not for giving that up, but a lot of this stuff is lost. If you'll notice, there was one presidential candidate here. Thank you very much. But there were lots, not actual candidates, but there were lots of surrogates that wanted to come, and it was like, really, this is about, right now in Oklahoma, I think it's about state ideas and state candidates. Now, once we have a nominee, again, I'm very concerned about making sure we have ballot access and stuff. But right now, I didn't want this convention to be about that, because I don't think it's as relevant as to what we need to do here and what's happening here. So just from my point of view, I would say state and below is our priority.
All right, final question right here.
Okay. Well, reluctantly, I came up to this thought. The people were asking about the debate again and again about, will we build roads? Folks, that's not really a question about administration or engineering, although it includes that. But before you're going to have any administration of where the roads are going to be built and who's going to engineering and construct them. You have a question of financing. So you want to ask, well, who's going to build the roads? And I'm going to ask you, well, how much money are you willing to lend and at what interest rate to get that road built? And then we can talk about it some more. So they're really asking a finance question component, as well as the usual things we think about automatically as, well, who's going to go out there and survey the land, decide who has to give up a piece of land and so forth. No, before anything moves, there's got to be some money behind it. Okay, that's the comment on the who's going to build the roads. Whoever's willing to lend the money is the person who's going to build the road. Okay, real quick. I have an action agenda which addresses partly some of the other questions that have been asked by the younger people here, which I propose be put up for discussion all the rest of the summer, since I'm not going to be a candidate until the courts put me on the ballot. I call it the deep agenda. The first part is called repudiate the federal debt completely. And the Congress that will repudiate the debt should immediately resign, all 535 of them, and call 535 special elections and let the people decide, well, you deserve to go back to Congress because you repudiated the debt, or you're not going to. Okay, that's the D part. The E part is, and this is going to strike a whole lot of people, it always has, that's crazy. Enlarge the U.S. House of Representatives. It's been 435 since like 1910. It's not in the Constitution, it's an act of Congress that grows the House of Representatives at 435. If you wanted to get closer to what the founders and the framers had in mind for Congress, it'd be around 6,000 U.S. representatives. That's the second E. The first E. The second E is a general election reform, which has a lot to do with the ballot stuff. And we've already been over a lot of the ballot things already. And finally, this is the one where you really kind of want to put it to the government people. Pension abolition. The prohibition of any pensions for federal government employees, including non-participation in Social Security. Think about it. You work for the federal government, you're supposed to pay Social Security tax. Where does the Social Security tax come from? It comes from the federal government. They put it in your payroll check, they take it back out and send it away. It's a shell game. No federal pensions whatsoever. Now, people want to do their own private pension plans with their paychecks, fine. But no federal subsidies of pensions for federal employees. And that's DEEP. And anybody who wants to take that and run on it, have a good time.
Yeah, I will say one thing, because you spurred a thought. We keep coming back to this, who will build the roads. The first question is, should there be a road built? And in a libertarian world, there would be no bridges to nowhere.
All right, let's give our panelists a hand.